I was thinking this morning, what is the goal of preaching? Okay, as I've been sat here, what is the goal of preaching? Now, some people will say the goal of preaching, and this is not entirely wrong, but I'd say this is where some people get it slightly too wrong, is to impart information. And so some people will like their preachers whether they decide they've learnt something new or not. I would argue that the goal of preaching is to see Jesus and want to worship him the other side of it. That's what I'm going to argue it is. And so the goal of preaching, or my goal right now is I want you to see Jesus and I want you to worship him. Okay? If you learn something new, great. If you don't, that's not terrible. Whereas I think sometimes we've liked our preachers based on how many letters they've got after their name and whether they can teach me something new from the Bible. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to see Jesus and to worship him. And I'm hoping as we look at this passage of John this morning, we are going to see him and want to worship him. So we may go into a couple of songs at the end of this time together rather than just one like we normally do, because I'm hoping we'll be in a place where we just want to worship him. And so, as a church, we've been going through the Gospel of John, and today I'm up to a bit where John 5. If you've got a Bible and you want to follow along, you can. I'm going to be reading from verses 16 to 29 of John 5. If you haven't got a Bible, do not worry. I will read it out. You can follow along. That is no problem at all. But if you do like to follow along in an actual physical book or on a device of some kind, you go for it. But I'm going to be looking at John 5, 16 to 29, where it says this. It says, so, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath. Now, last week, Andy talked about this healing that occurred on the Sabbath, and this is directly following on from that. So, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Jesus gave him this answer, very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing. Because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Yes, and he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it. Moreover, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honored the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Very truly I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but is crossed over from death to life. Very truly I tell you, a time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to judge, because he is the Son of Man. Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. And those who have done what is good will rise to live. And those who have done what is evil will rise to be condemned. This passage may seem a little confusing. I'm going to suggest you read it again in the week, because I think there's a lot in here, and there's a lot in here which should lead us to worship. Now, in John's Gospel, as we've been going through, there's a balance that seems to be struck between the action scenes, where we see Jesus performing miracles. So I'd say last week there was this story of this man who couldn't get in the pool, and so Jesus comes along and effectively heals this man. And he does it on the Sabbath. So you get these miracles, and then you get the extended theological reflections on what has happened. And this passage is one of those explanations, which for the most part is a monologue by Jesus that follows the healing on the Sabbath. And so there's lots happening here. and often more than we realize. But this passage is key for us in understanding some very, very big truths about who Jesus is. Because up until this point, there were certain Jewish laws that the people had followed, but Jesus is now coming along and making a rather large statement. And sometimes, always in this, we can look at these things and go, well, churches can almost become a bit, in some sense, feel a bit anti-Semitic. No, we're not anti-Jewish, but because Jesus was a Jew, but what we're saying is Jesus came along and fulfilled certain things and changed the way certain things looked because they found their fulfillment in him. And this is what we start to see here. And it's also really interesting, the language that we start using. You've got to remember, what happens to Jesus just before the cross is he goes to trial. But he's already on trial. If you look at verse 17, it says, in his defense. It's almost like Jesus is already on trial right now. He's on trial from a miracle he's performed. So when you talk about the trials of Jesus, it's not just right up at the end moments. It's even in this part of his life, the whole way through his life, it was like he was on trial for what he was doing. People were constantly trying to catch him out. But what he starts doing now is he starts asserting his authority. My Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. He is now associating himself with God the Father in a way which we might not have seen too much before. Because he's saying, well, if God is always working, I'm always working. Now, they wouldn't have a problem with that necessarily because God is always at work. God doesn't necessarily take a day off in that sense. He's always there to be prayed to. He is always there to be worshipped. He is always there. But the problem is now, Jesus is coming along and almost saying, well, who are you to tell me I can't heal on the Sabbath because I and my Father are one? There's something important going on here that Jesus is trying to help them to see. And this causes real tension because for this reason they tried all the more to kill him. Because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, that was bad enough. He was breaking this law of a day of rest. In their eyes, he was breaking it by performing a healing on the Sabbath. He was going against the law of the land. But he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And this is a major problem for the people who were hearing at the day. And it's still a major problem today. Because as soon as you talk about Jesus, lots of people will say Jesus was a good man. Jesus had some good teachings. But some people struggle to say, but he was the Son of God. Or some people will struggle to say, he is the only way to Jesus. Only way to God, sorry. They struggle to make those connections. Even in other world religions, they will recognize Jesus. Even in other parts of, you could call Christianity, we'll see Jesus as a prophet. That I would say are probably not Christian. They would argue they're Christian, but they wouldn't see him as the Son of God. But here Jesus is making a direct claim, well, my Father. He is saying, well, he is my Father and I am his Son. And they didn't like the fact that he's calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So then Jesus goes into this, teaching them, well, what's going on? Well, he says, well, I can't do anything by myself. I can only do what I see my Father doing. There's this sort of apprenticeship thing going on in a sense where, and this is part of the mystery of the Trinity in the sense. You've got God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. They're all God, but they all have different roles and responsibilities within that and how that works out. But there's also, well, the Son can only do what the Father has shown him. And, you know, I had something very similar recently. Theo was going to put a picture up. I'm one of these people I grew up not really learning a lot of skills from my dad in terms of DIY. I like to get Theo involved with different things. And so here he is using a chop saw. You might think a 13-year-old shouldn't be using a chop saw. But I was outside. We were cutting some wood for the log burner. In fact, they're the old rafters from the church roof we're cutting up right now. So the church is currently keeping my family warm. So thank you very much. But here we are, and I'm out, and I'm doing some jobs with him. And you'll like to see he's got his goggles on. He's got some noise-cancelling headphones on. He's got gloves on, all very safe. But what I'm doing is I show him how to do it, and then I let him do all the work. This is brilliant, by the way. Now he does it. I'm there, okay? But what we've got as an example here, same with God the Father. He has seen me doing it. I've told him what to do, and now he's doing it. And this is exactly what Jesus is saying is happening in this moment. He is saying, well, I can do nothing by myself. I need to do what I see my Father doing. Because whatever he does, I'm doing also. There's a moment here of Jesus going, well, I'm just fulfilling my Father's will. And that's what I'm trying to do. And you might have examples in life where you've showed someone else, you've almost had someone working under you, and you've been showing them, well, these are the things we need to be doing, and let's go and do these sort of things. And for me, this was just a moment where Theo and I got to share together something like what Jesus is talking about here. And let's not forget, Jesus was a carpenter, and I'm sure he's a better carpenter than Theo or I. Well, you might be a good carpenter, Theo, better than I will ever be, okay? If you saw how I cut my pieces for the log burner, they are not the most accurate, but hey, they're being burnt. So it doesn't really matter. So you can take your picture down now, unless you want to keep looking at yourself, Theo. So the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he does. But yet he also says in this passage, but we're going to do even greater things. Because you've got to remember at this point, Jesus is still not showing the people exactly what he's going to be doing, exactly how it's going to work out, exactly what it's going to look like. He has not shown them all of that. Or even if he's indicated towards it, they have not grasped what is going to happen, how he's going to defeat death himself. But then he goes on further, saying, for just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it. Now, this is taking them back to the Old Testament where God the Father is in charge, but now he's saying, well, actually, the authority has been delegated to the Son. The Son is the one who chooses who gets life and who doesn't get life. He's making a big statement here and saying, if you want to find life, the only way is through the Son. Because the authority has been given to the Son to choose who has got life and who has not got life. And who he is pleased to give it to it. Because the Father judges no one. He's entrusted all judgment to the Son. So he's pointing us to the fact that actually, whether you are saved or not, whether one day when you are going to face God, it's up to Jesus whether you have life, eternal, or death, eternal. That all comes back to the Son. And so the Son is really important. So you might meet different people out there. You see them on the doorstep, and you see them on street corners, don't you? Some up by Pandora's quite often, who will argue that Jesus is not the Son of God. Well, what do you do with passages like this in the Bible, where Jesus is clearly telling us he is the Son of God? What do you do when people are saying, yeah, he was important, he was good, but I'm not sure he's the Son of God? Well, then we've got to be very careful, because in verse 23 it says, whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. And if you do not honor the Son who's the one who gives life, you might need to question whether you're saved at all. Because the Son is the one who's pleased to give it. Because authority has been delegated. Very truly, I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. So the question is that this passage is pointing us towards Jesus and saying, well, who is Jesus? Who do you see Jesus as? Do you see him as this one who can offer you eternal life or not? Because he is the only way to this. You're not going to be judged, but it's not just hears his word and believes. He then goes on to talk about how we need to say, whoever does not honor the Son, how do you honor the Son? You follow him. You live by him. Honoring the Son looks like a life which is saying, I'm living for you. Honoring the Son isn't a one-time commitment, and I think this is where churches, historically, we've sometimes got to make a commitment once and that's it, and you can do whatever you want after that. You say, well, technically that's true, but what does really honoring the Son look like? Honoring the Son looks like following him even when it's hard. Even when there's something in the Bible you think, oh, I struggle with that. I really struggle with that. I disagree with that. Honoring the Son means, well, if he said it, whose word is final, mine or his? Whose word is final? What culture tells me, what TikTok tells me, what Instagram tells me, or his word? That's what honoring the Son looks like. Honoring the Son doesn't look like, yeah, I'll do this a bit casually, I'll sing a few songs. Every so often I'll think a little bit. It means actually, no, living and following him and apprenticing after him. It means following him And that's a challenge for all of us. And this passage is huge in helping us to understand that Jesus is the Son of God. In fact, it's possibly one of the most, if not the most, clear passage in the entire Bible. And as the Son of God, certain things apply to him. One of them is the Sabbath rule do not apply to him, in terms of he doesn't need to follow it as they follow it, because just as his Father is working, so is he. He would have still followed the Sabbath a lot, I'm sure, because he grew up in a Jewish culture. But he's also trying to help them see, I'm not only a son of man, I'm a son of God. I'm trying to show you something different. And we see this relationship between the Son and the Father. And it helps us to see Jesus as truly divine and responding to him correctly. And Jesus here, as he's talking to these people, as he's talking to us, we see the Jewish leaders who are trying to persecute him here. He's trying to help them to see, look, some of the things, such as in this case the Sabbath, what he does in John's Gospel is it's fascinating, is he takes various elements of life as they knew it, which was the Jewish life as they knew it, and he says, basically, this is how you now see these things in me. And this is one of those things he says. And I wonder if Jesus was to come to a church like ours or any other, what he would look at and go, why do you do that the way you do it? Is there a reason you do things in that way? Is there a reason you do this? Is there a reason you do that? And I wonder how we would respond. Would we respond in the same way as these Jewish leaders and be so offended? So, for instance, he's talking here about the Sabbath. Now, we live in what is a Sabbatarian culture, in a sense, historically, where Sunday was a Sabbath. Because everything was closed on a Sunday in a nation like ours, years and years ago. Now, everything is open on a Sunday. It might still be limited hours, but it's open. That's changed even in my lifetime. That has shifted. But why does a Sabbath need to be a Sunday? Does it need to be a Sunday? Where have we pulled that from? Where have we got that from? Because it was for the Jewish people of the time. Does it need to be for us today? Is the principle more that the Sabbath could be any day because your working pattern, your life may not fit it? Or does it need to be a Sunday? Why is that? So are there things that we bring into our lives where Jesus might go, well, that's just become tradition because you always do it. But why do you always do it? And does it honour me, or are you worshipping me, or are you worshipping tradition, the other side of it? And you could probably think of loads of things, the sort of things that people get up in arms about in church life. Well, why are you so cross about that? Why are you so cross that we no longer maybe do communion in a certain way, or that we no longer sing a song that you like? Why is it? Is it tradition, or is it about worshipping Jesus? What is it that's causing that? Are there things, if Jesus was to come here, he would go, well, very truly, I tell you, you're not actually worshipping me. You're worshipping the thing that is the very thing that you thought led you to Jesus, but has actually led you away from Jesus. And that could be anything in our life. And it's amazing what things have come into church life that maybe have changed those things. And, and this is why the church needs to keep moving forward and keep changing, because I think nothing is set in stone. Jesus didn't come along and say, you shall have, a service that lasts an hour. If it goes a minute over, people can complain. You should have this many songs. You should have this many people on stage. He didn't say anything like that. And yet it becomes tradition over time, doesn't it? And we've got to be careful. Even things like, well, offering, take money. We don't take up an offering as many churches might in the traditional sense, because, well, in a New Testament church service, I don't know if that's how they did it. Did they pass around some kind of bag or plate? No idea. But what I do know is that they gave to the work of the church, and so we still give people an opportunity to do that. It goes in our weekly newsletter. There's a giving point just out there. But does it need to be in my church service? Not necessarily. It could be, but it doesn't need to be. What's become tradition and what has taken over? And one other thing I want to just quickly put in as a bit of an aside here is sometimes passages like this can cause a bit of a stir in us depending on our relationship with our Father, whatever that looks like. our own father in life, our own dad, whatever you want to call him. Because we've all had different relationships. Sometimes we've had a good dad, sometimes we've not had a good dad, sometimes we haven't even had a dad. Sometimes we've had someone else being dad. There's all sorts of different things. And so when we read the word father, sometimes it can bring up positive, but it can also bring up negative memories. So when we start hearing about the son and the father, we start bringing in our own feelings of father, and that can then change how we sometimes view God the Father. I just want to be very clear here that I think it is a lie of the enemy that behind a smiling Jesus there's a frowning Father. Because I think that's what can happen sometimes. We can, depending on our own father relationship, whatever that looks like, we can sometimes think Jesus looks great, but the Father I struggle with because of my feeling. But behind Jesus, there's not a frowning Father. Because actually in John 16, we read that the Father himself loves you. And so I just want, just as a bit of an aside in there, because passages like this sometimes can be a little tricky, I want you to know the Father loves you. Not just Jesus loves you, but the Father as well loves you. No matter what your upbringing is like. Now that may be hard for you to hear. I don't know where you're sat today. I don't know all of your histories. I know some of them, depending what we've spoken about and things like that. But I want you to know the Father himself loves you. Not just Jesus, but the Father as well. He loves you. But going back to, more importantly in this passage, is the major things I want to take us away, and which I hope will lead us to worship today, is the fact that from this we can see the Son is equal with the Father. One of the questions that people sometimes ask about things like this is whether Jesus himself taught that he was God. Now, in this passage, we have an example of him doing just that. His response to the accusation of the Sabbath breaking was not to appeal on a technicality, but to double down and say that because the Father is working, so is he. So he's accused here of breaking the Sabbath law, and instead of just saying, well, defending himself, he actually goes a step further and say, well, I did, but I and the Father are one. He makes a second claim. He doubles down. And in this statement, he's expressing equality between himself and God, the Father. And it's significant because the way the hearers respond to it is they consider it blasphemy and want to kill him. But then as we go through this, we see that Jesus goes on to show there are other attributes that are only true of God and are also true of him, such as raising the dead, such as giving life, executing judgment, and receiving worship. You see, Jesus didn't just come, as I said, as an inspiring teacher or a moral example, but he made claims of divinity. And we must respond to those claims in one way or another. In fact, there was a man you may well know, C.S. Lewis. He wrote a whole number of books. And in one of his books called Mere Christianity, there's this very famous thing he says. He says this, he says, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. They say, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he did not intend to. Jesus made some very big claims, and we have got to decide who we are coming to in worship. Who is he? Because he cannot just be a great moral teacher. He's either the Son of God or he's not. You've got to come to that decision yourself as to who he is. But also within this, we can see that the Son follows the Father's lead. You see, equality between the Father and the Son does not mean that their relationship is a symmetrical one. They're both equal, they're both God, and yet their relationship is not symmetrical in the way it works out. There's a way in how they relate to each other. There's a way in how they do different things. It doesn't mean one is necessarily greater than the other, but what it does mean is the way that their things work out in a different way. It's the same within the church nowadays, isn't it? You see the church, different people have different roles. It doesn't mean anyone is greater than anyone else. I am not greater than anyone else because I am up here speaking more often, or I'm the one employed by the church. I am not a greater Christian than anyone else. I have not been employed because of my great Christianness. Okay? That is not why I have been employed by the church. I have hopefully been employed because people felt that in God I was the right person to lead the church forward, not because I had ticked all the right boxes with how holy I am and the rest of it, but because they felt that actually I was the right person to lead the church forward. And what we see here is the relationship between the Father and the Son is equality, but they have different roles. Only one of the Father and the Son went to the cross. The Father didn't, the Son did. But they're both God, but they have different roles and how they work out. And we see here as well that the Son then starts doing what he sees the Father doing. And in some ways, like I said, this relationship is akin to an old family business. I don't know if we've got anyone here who had a son who maybe or a daughter who followed in their footsteps and took on the family business. We might do, I'm not sure. But it used to happen. Oh, Keith did, yeah, at the back there. Well, thank you. But, they take on the family business in a sense. And, years ago, your surname was often related to the job you did, and then it was someone and son, wasn't it? And it all came things like that. I don't know what mine would be. Parrot, what do you reckon? I have no idea what my family would have done. Technically, Paré. So for those of you that watched Keeping Up Appearances years ago, it's not bucket, it's bouquet. It's not parrot, it's Paré. Okay? All right? So from now on, I expect you to refer to me in a more posh tone. Okay? So, but you took on the family business, and that's almost what the Father and the Son, this relationship is going here. And because we've got to remember that the Son has been there with him. Where the Father shows the Son the work and then says to the Son, you go and do it. And this means that when we see God's activity, it tends to be initiated by the Father and accomplished by the Son. And think about it, what happened in creation? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We see it right there, don't we? They were there working together. And it tracks through creation, it tracks through revelation, it tracks through salvation, and so on. They are working together, but they have different roles in it. And so it would be wrong of us to try and pry the Father and Son apart as though they have somehow different temperaments or agendas. They have the same agenda. They work together, and the Son listens to the Father and acts accordingly. And if even Jesus related to the Father in this way, the question is, how much more should we do so? If the Father told the Son and the Son did that, how much more should we listen to the Son and copy the Son? If we're to be disciples, if we're to be Christians, if we're to be followers of Jesus, how much do we need to be listening to what he is saying and putting that into practice and doing that? Even more so, shouldn't we? Because we are not perfect like Jesus. We have weaknesses, so we've got to try really hard to do it. And so I want us to be thinking today, what areas are there in my life where I'm not following him? What does that look like for you? What are the areas where I just struggle with what he's saying there, but actually he might be saying to you, but you need to follow me. One of the strongest calls of the New Testament is come follow me. He doesn't put in lots of other extra little bits in there, come follow me and do, but. It just come follow me. And that means very simply, come and follow him with what he says, with what he does, and let's look to follow him and almost be an apprentice of him. Join that Father's business, and let's be like them. So how much do we need to do that? And so as we look to bring this to a close, I want it to bring us to a place of worship. Because I think we can't come to Jesus in a way which is casual. We can't come to Jesus, yeah, I'll take it and leave it. Yeah, I think I'll follow him today because it's not a great day and he might help me out today. Or, maybe we'll see. Oh, I don't know if I'll follow him on that. I don't like that. What I read on the internet was different, and therefore I don't think Jesus was right on that issue. He doesn't do that. He just says, come follow me. Come follow me. He doesn't say, do it, but you're allowed to bring in all your own amendments. He says, come follow me. And I think where we've got it wrong when we approach Jesus as the Son, we sometimes take our culture and read it into the Bible rather than let the Bible read into our culture. And what then tends to happen is we get people who want to follow Jesus but then don't like him when he does something they don't like or don't agree with. I don't think he gives us that option. He says, come follow me. And that might mean it's hard sometimes, but let's face it, the Father said the Son had to go to the cross. Do we think that was easy? That wasn't easy. He took it all on. But the Father's ways are higher than our ways. Sometimes we don't understand the purpose of these things. But he says, come follow me.